So tell us about yourself and how you got into the blockchain space.
Okay. Sort of. All right, so I have like 10 minutes, right?
Quickly.
All right. My name's Jeremy Gardner, managing partner at Awesome Ventures, a hybrid venture hedge fund. Previously founded the Blockchain Education Network, Distributed Magazine, and Augur. I got into the blockchain space in late 2013, 2014, having come out of the world of politics, trying to change the world, occupy Wall Street, thinking we could change the banks from the inside, and instead realized that the only way you could do it, change the banking system, the financial system, was to create an entirely new value system. And so when I discovered Bitcoin, I got immediately hooked.
So I was in high school when I first started messing around with blockchain and cryptocurrencies. I'm originally from Hong Kong, so I was born there, and then the handover occurred. And so my first dive into blockchain was entirely pertaining to decentralized governance and how we could create more transparent political systems. So in 2017, I was on the founding team of ZenCash, which is an end-to-end encrypted privacy platform. And then recently, I've kind of transitioned to advising startups and working with funds. Notably, I'm a partner at a new blockchain for impact fund called Ezra.
And I'm Raphaël. I'm the CEO of a company called Alice, which is a social impact network built on Ethereum. And I was a lobbyist before, well, I had a whole career in lobbying, and decided to move over to the light side after having spent so much time working with really evil corporations. Set up a first advocacy and activism network that helped activist groups do more than just sign a petition or like a Facebook page. But one of the problems with that is that people weren't donating, and we needed them to donate as well. So started looking into the reasons behind why people weren't donating. It was really clear that it was because they'd lost trust in the charity sector, and blockchain was a really great way to sort of start addressing that. So I was messing around with Bitcoin back in 2014, set up Alice in 2015, which just after Ethereum came about, smart contracts, and that's the rest is history, basically.
Well, we're very honored to have all of you here today. So today our topic is about blockchain for social good and social impact. So I'd like to start off with the topic of talking about the unbankable in the bank, because this is something we talk about a lot in the cryptocurrency space. So how will blockchain really help the unbankable, especially in developing countries and especially with impoverished women?
Well, first, blockchain technology is going to unbank the banked. We're not going to see the adoption of blockchain tech by those without access to traditional financial services, simply because this is not something that has primarily been developed with those people in mind thus far. You know, we have seen a shift in investment and entrepreneurship targeting developing world audiences, but right now, most of the technology that exists is built entirely for people in the West, you know, in developed countries with their cell phones that have access to banks and credit cards. And, you know, Bitcoin really hasn't served anyone yet. We're getting there, but the on-ramps are just being developed today.
Yeah, and some of those on-ramps include digital identity, for example, the ability to store documents that prove either like right of ownership or like birth certificates, and these are all prerequisites to being onboarded into a banking system, right? And so once kind of those endpoints are solved, access points are solved, that's when we'll see the technology kind of transition to actually making a difference in the world for the unbanked.
I agree with all of that. The last mile is always the most difficult bit to solve. So there's been all this hype forever about the fact that we're going to help people who don't have bank accounts, and you can do remittances much easier, and it's going to cost a lot less. But I don't think that's materialized, and to a large extent, I don't think that it's really going to anytime soon. So we don't focus on at Alice on sending money, for example, or banking the unbanked. It's much more about tracking the services to people who are underprivileged or poor, and making sure that all of those services work and they can scale up if they're effective.
And I think that's a good point. Also, it'll always be hardest to access individuals in the unbanked world, so it's easier to go through trusted institutions who can act as that on-ramp to bring them into the ecosystem that we're building.
But the real reason why people don't have access to traditional financial services today, one of the biggest things has to do with identity. People do not have a provable online identity or identity that they can even take a bit to open up a bank account. We don't really change that with blockchain tech. In order for most people to be served, they still need to have some form of identity. That's a problem that I think blockchain technology will help solve, but it hasn't solved yet. And so until we figure out how to create really strong digital identities, perhaps tied to some sort of blockchain ID, we can't really on-ramp the 2.5 billion people that don't have access to traditional financial services.
And Fu, just kind of throwing it back to you, what do you think about blockchain solutions for disempowered women specifically?
Well, I think when you think about the underbanked and unbankable, that is mostly women in the developing world. And when they finally become banked, and they're the ones who have the most spending power. They are the ones who create the community and are spending for their families. So that will make a tremendous difference in the lives of billions of people. So that's why I'm so passionate about this space and what it can do for lives, especially women all over the world. And that's why I started the Women in Blockchain Foundation. So thank you for asking. Here's another question. So how will open source technology be important to promote social good in blockchain projects?
I think a big part of where the crossover between open source and social impact is that almost all the technologies being developed in this space are open source, especially any of these token projects. And what that means is that maybe there's a token project or there's some open source development in the blockchain space that is not targeted towards the developing world or social impact, but another open source developer realizes, hey, I can target like this app, this mobile wallet for financial inclusion, and you can then re-architect those open source systems for a much more targeted audience. Open source allows for a lot of combinations and merging of technologies that you wouldn't otherwise have be possible.
And also it allows people in the developing world to actually contribute and build solutions for themselves. So products can become a lot more localized at lower cost because you're actually having your end customer contributing to build.
I mean, in general, I think open source is social impact in itself, just because we're raging against an existing system that's just geared towards monopolistic behaviors, and having open source tech out there just levels the playing field in a lot of ways. So we drive our lawyers nuts because they're like, you have to put, in investment documents or whatever that it's all open source and you can't patent anything. And we're like, but you have to shift your mindset. It's unenforceable anyway to, if you're a small company, writing patents is super expensive. You're never going to win a battle against a big company trying to steal tech from you, so you might as well just make everything open source, collaborate with everybody, and start building those networks instead of focusing on walled gardens.
So Jeremy, this is a question for you. So with your fund, you're mostly doing impact investing. So what is your criteria for the projects that you invest in?
I'm glad you asked. When I was looking at social impact funds as they exist today, it's really just embarrassing for the most part. They don't really deliver returns. They're limited by these key performance indicators or KPIs that really measure success in such obtuse ways that it's really hard to deliver venture-like returns. Maybe you get something like 5% annualized, but it's not impressive. And so when I was thinking about launching my own fund, I knew that 60 to 70% of good use cases for blockchain technology fundamentally will make the world better in 7 to 10 years if they're successful. So I didn't want to limit myself with all these KPIs or metrics. I said, let me identify the companies that I really think will have this meaningful, broad impact that maybe we can't exactly define today, but we can invest in now and we can help shape them towards the broadest possible social impact in the long run. And being the anchor of my own fund allows me to do that.
And Raphael, I just want to hear a little bit about your experience working with impact funds and then also working within the blockchain space.
Yeah, so we I take a completely different view to Jeremy's, at least in the short term, which is that the KPIs are actually really important if you want to measure effectiveness. But as you were saying, it's just so expensive to systematically measure stuff, and even just to design a good project with proper attribution is, what would happen if this project didn't exist? Would it actually be affecting change or not? And measuring that just makes the costs really prohibitive for a lot of impact funds to actually make money out of them. So what we've done at Alice is try to focus on that and just breaking down the transaction costs. The first step is to actually just make sure that all the impact data is out there. So the basic incentive layer for what we're building is conditional donation. So if you make a donation to a project, the charity only gets the money when it can prove that it's achieved its goals. So at least the impact data is out there. People can start benchmarking and comparing projects. The best ones tend to bubble to the top. And impact funds come in to actually provide the working capital so that charities have, or nonprofits have, money up front to start doing that. But then what you want to start doing is actually spreading the costs of monitoring and evaluation across the network, incentivize people to actually pass data from one project to another so you can start comparing them, make sure that through these validator markets that we're creating, you actually reduce the cost of evaluation. You also reduce the cost of the legal setups, because what often happens is when you're an impact investment fund, you do your whole due diligence all over again, you set up custom contracts all over again. If you encode everything in smart contracts, you can start streamlining all of that. So hopefully with Jeremy's approach and our approach, you can sort of start working on both ends to the point where you can actually track impact, measure it properly, but also really affect change and give investors a return on their money. I mean, I get enraged when it makes sense to people that you should make tons of money when you're working in finance or big pharma or oil and gas or, big tech companies. But when you're working for a social impact project or a social enterprise or a charity, God forbid you should make any money. I think actually every company in the world should be a social impact company, and that's really what we're trying to get towards.
Yeah, and I think we converge there. I mean, especially with blockchain technology, so blockchains are all about network effects. And so if you're making something that's socially impactful in the blockchain space, it's only going to make money on the long term if it's impactful. And so the broader the impact, the more money you make. And that's one of the key attributes of blockchains, is that the network effects, especially in these token networks, just dramatically raise the tide for everyone when projects are successful.
Well, a little bit more about what you were doing. So I've worked with quite a few charitable organizations, being on the board of quite a few, and also contributing to a lot. And I've seen that a lot of our donations, we just don't know where they go. And so how will blockchain technology and what you've been doing impact all this?
Okay, so the intuitive thing to do is to actually track the money. That's what a lot of blockchain charity projects are doing, and I think that's a bit of a red herring. So fundamentally, from experience, but also from all the reports that have been put out there, people fundamentally don't really care about how the money is spent. You know how you generally have an end-of-year report that shows X amount goes to admin costs, and X amount goes to PR, and X amount goes to this. Nobody ever reads those things because it doesn't tell you the fundamental real core element, which is how many lives are we improving and how are we improving them. So we took the decision really early to not track the money, but to track the impact.
Well, I've seen, I think the Red Cross, only less than 10% of any donation actually goes to whatever project that is being used. And that's really absurd. I wouldn't ever want to donate to causes where I don't see my money going directly to the cause.
See, but statistics like that I don't think make a lot of sense. So I'll give you the example of the pilot project that we rolled out last year. It was so our first pilot project. It was a homelessness charity called St. Mungo's in London, helping homeless people find accommodation and deal with mental health issues, deal with substance abuse issues, and The donations were only paid out when the charity could prove through a rental agreement, for example, that they'd helped someone find a flat, or through a doctor's note that they'd gone to rehab or whatever. Precisely 0% of the money went to the homeless people. Everything went to the key workers who were working day in, day out with the beneficiaries, with the homeless people who had really messed up, who have, in theory, access to tons of benefits that can help them get back on track, but just don't have the means to do so. So from that perspective, everything is overhead. And if you start, it's really easy for tabloids to manipulate that kind of data and say, 0% went to the beneficiaries, and it's disgusting. But that's why, again, to try to sidestep that, we're just looking at the impact. But that doesn't mean that you can't get back to looking at efficiency as well, right? So if you have two similar projects that are achieving the same results, placing kids or helping homeless people find accommodation or whatever, and they have 90% track record of achieving their goals, but one of them gets paid 100% more every time it does so. If you're like in the slightest bit rational, you're probably going to go for the most, for the leanest one, and that's where it can come back in.
Yeah, I mean, Raphael can be more right here. I founded 2 nonprofits, both functioning today, and 0 of the money that we raise actually goes to the causes, per se, that we're working on, because the administrators that are getting paid are the ones addressing those causes. So administrative costs are this thing that are blown out of, it's just totally senseless how it's perceived, because for the most part, it is the people behind the nonprofits that actually make the impact.
And it's funny because at the same time, people will equally say that direct investment is ineffective and that there needs to be facilitators to ensure that they're onboarding people properly and educating and skilling people up. And yet direct investment seems to be more purist, and that's what the public seems to want from nonprofits.
Yeah, I mean, giving directly, giving just people money in the most cases is the best way to improve their lives, and that's one thing that I think people are beginning to realize about philanthropy. But then there are nonprofits where you're helping people that can't help themselves or need some structuring. Excuse me, that's where nonprofits can be really deeply impactful. But I think most nonprofits are garbage, and giving the people that they're trying to serve would be a lot more helpful.
Well, so with Women in Blockchain Foundation, I'm actually in the process of turning it into a nonprofit, but currently I've actually been funding it myself, and I've been funding blockchain education to help women learn blockchain development. So I've been paying for workshops and paying for conferences and sending women to them all over the world. And now that I'm turning into an actual organization where we can accept money, these are things that I'm worried about. It's like I have to pay people, and
And so the model that we've taken, especially with the Blockchain Education Network, which is the nonprofit I founded in 2014, what we do is instead of focusing on administrative costs, at the beginning of each year, or the end of each year, at the end of the tax year, I raise a bunch of money for the nonprofit to pay for all the administrative costs. And then when I want to send students to conferences or do education initiatives or help host a conference, what we do is we do direct grants. So we go to corporate sponsors and say, hey, go sponsor a bunch of students to come to a conference. And that way they are giving directly, going back to Jane's point. Is you just raise as much money you need to run the organization, and then everything else should go directly to the causes that you're trying to address, because then the donors feel better.
Actually, so we're running low on time. So I just want to tie this all into an individual level. So how can we, everyone here, how can we be of service and take responsibility, and really, whether we're directly working on a blockchain project or not, but how can we be a part of something that is bigger than ourselves as it ties into blockchain? What do you think?
I think there's so many brilliant causes. I mean, if you read about blockchain technology for social impact, there are nonprofits, there are NGOs, there are all these organizations that are really trying to solve key problems in the world using this tech. If you're an open source developer, if you're an investor with some money, you should contribute to these projects in some way. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time, but just be of assistance, because this industry gains when there's a positive social impact associated with what we're doing.
I think everyone on this stage at one point went through a paradigm shift where we realized that the old system is failing people. So I think at the very personal level, everyone in the audience should take the time to educate themselves and read up on how we could have new systems that we all contribute to and that are more meritocratic and fair, and then look at ways that you can contribute to these either through like tech development, investing, or founding companies.
Really cheekily, go to Alice.si. We have loads of things that we need help on, from the code base to volunteering to helping spread the word. So get involved in like good blockchain projects that are focused on improving the world rather than fractal gambling tokens that are going to supposedly go to the moon.
Unless it's Augur. But
And I like to just spread the word about redefining what it means to be a billionaire now that, you know, a lot of us are crypto rich. And we talk about, you know, instead of being a billionaire is having $1 billion, let's becoming a billionaire by impacting 1 billion lives. So I hope that every one of us becomes a billionaire. So thank you very much.